And we're back. Another week, another episode of The Word Made Fresh. I'm Reverend Jim Keat, the digital minister at the Riverside Church, and The Word Made Fresh is a weekly video Bible study and sermon prep resource where we explore an upcoming lectionary passage and then talk about it in the comments down there. Then we borrow ideas for the sermons you're preaching, or the Bible study you're leading, or however you want to use this video. This week we're looking at the gospel text, which is what we do almost every week. Only this one feels a little bit different because this is the text that's going to be read on the first Sunday after the 2020 presidential election. So let's start by reading the text. We'll explore it a bit, and then we'll see how it intersects with the world around us. Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13. Here's what it says. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 of them were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, "Look, here is the bridegroom. Come out and meet him." Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise replied, "No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the other bridesmaids came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you neither know the day nor the hour." Now, there are many layers of nuance and cultural context in a parable like this, especially when it's describing traditions that are quite a bit different than most weddings in 21st century America. And we're not going to dive into all of them because that would require pretty much an entire seminary course to unpack, but I want us to look at one specific aspect of this parable. Rather than asking what it is describing, I want us to explore when it is describing. You see, a parable like this can easily be understood to be saying something about the second coming of Christ, the whole "when Jesus comes back at the end of the world" sort of thing that we easily misunderstand from the book of Revelation. More on that in another episode of The Word Made Fresh sometime. Or all of the things that we just accidentally believe sometimes from bad pop theology like the Left Behind series. Side note, when I was in college during the height of the Left Behind craze, I began drafting an idea for a similar series but with a different theological perspective. I called it Still Here. An airplane takes off full of passengers. It lands with everyone on board. They are still here. I mean, it's good theology, but it's not quite the fictitious page-turning drama that Tim LaHaye concocted. Okay, back to this parable in Matthew 25. It's easy to assume that this parable is talking about the future, as if Jesus is saying, "When I come back someday, you all better make sure that you're those wise bridesmaids who are prepared and awake so you can see me coming." And it's easy to understand why we might gravitate towards an interpretation like that, as it allows us to find ourselves in the story as these future bridesmaids who are keeping our lamps lit so that we can stay awake and keep our eyes peeled to see the end of the world whenever it shows up. But rather than assuming that Jesus was talking about the future, what if he was commenting on his present day? What if his story about the arrival of a bridegroom isn't a futuristic prediction, but simply his way of saying to everyone, "Hello, it's me, I'm the bridegroom, and half of you have been asleep on the job and didn't even see me coming. Aren't you aware of what God is up to? Stop dreaming of a utopian future and wake up to see what's right in front of you. The bridegroom is here." You see, Jesus isn't telling a story about the future. He's offering a commentary on the present. Now, the implications for this are huge, and not just because it means that we might have been misunderstanding and misinterpreting Jesus' parable for a long, long time, though that's not really anything new now, is it? But when we look at the parable this way, it exposes the way that we're looking for something still to come at the expense of what's right here in front of us. We assume that everything will be better in the future, so we tolerate the problems around us. We tell ourselves that tomorrow will be better than today, so why not just give up and stop addressing the problems of today? We look for Jesus to come someday. We tell ourselves to stay awake so we can see him coming, flying in on that spaceship called heaven, ready to beam us up so we can all fly away. And we miss out on the invitation to see Jesus around us now, echoing those prophetic words from Belinda Carlisle, "Heaven is a place on earth." Rather than waiting for a future someday when everything will magically be better, we are called to live and work now to bring heaven to the literal hell that is raging all around us. Because just like the parable, the same is too often true for us, especially in the church. We're asleep at the wheel. We doze off assuming that we have all the time in the world, but the reality is, it's already here. We're not waiting for Jesus to come someday. We need to wake up and realize that Jesus is already here, embodied in the hands and feet and faces of you and me as we live and breathe and work for love and justice now in our lives and in the world around us. Because this parable isn't a commentary on the future, it's a commentary about the present. Wake up and see what's happening now. Oh, and one more thing that definitely needs to be said, given that I'm recording this less than a week before the 2020 presidential election. For those of you who are watching this before November 3rd, I think that this parable, and specifically this approach to it, is an invitation to wake up and realize that our efforts to vote and organize our communities are needed now more than ever. We can't just doze off for this one, but we must stay awake to organize, to use our voice, to vote now and not just someday in the future. Seriously, if you haven't voted yet early in your area or haven't made a plan to vote, do that now, because November 3rd, it might be here by the time you're watching this video. Vote now! Or if you're watching this after November 3rd, well, then this is not the time for a nap just because election day is behind us. Voting and organizing were necessary leading up to this election, and they will continue to be needed regardless of how all of this turns out. And really, we need to stay awake to see this process unfold. Our future is literally being decided in the present. Not someday, but now. And if we fall asleep now, then you might not recognize the future you wake up to. But if we stay awake now, when we realize that Jesus is talking about the present and not the future, then we hear the call to open our eyes, to stay awake, to be active and alert and engaged in the world as it is now, so that we can be a part of the work to bring heaven to earth today and tomorrow and every tomorrow after that. That's all for this week. Leave a comment below with your thoughts about this parable and how it intersects with our world today and our lives. You can give us a glimpse of what you're preaching this Sunday or the Bible study you're leading. How are you going to invite your congregation, your group to explore this parable and see how it impacts our lives, our world now? And then I'll see you back here next week for another episode of The Word Made Fresh. See you then.